Well, hello everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. I've been looking forward to meeting you and working with you. With the world in meltdown, our teams are likely to be way outside their comfort zones and understandably emotional. And when people are in a heightened state of emotion, they don't always think clearly or behave rationally, which means that your team might be less effective than before. So how can we lead them confidently through this? This 1-hour session on leading with emotional intelligence will give you ideas and suggestions of ways you can do that. By the end of the session, you'll have a clearer idea of how to use emotional intelligence and which bits you want to explore further. I don't know how much you already know, but I've assumed that if you're a world expert, you probably haven't signed up for this webinar. Let's get started. So, as you can see, Daniel Goleman's definition of emotional intelligence is the capacity for recognizing our own feelings and those of others, for motivating ourselves, and for managing emotions well in ourselves and in our relationships. In a nutshell, emotional intelligence is about how you do things and how you relate to others, not just what you do. And the phrase emotional intelligence is a bit of a mouthful, so I'm going to shorten it to EI from now on. You've probably heard people referring to EQ, but of course EQ is the quotient, it's the measure rather than the thing itself. I've used Goleman's work in preparing this session. And although he wasn't the first to research the topic, his 1995 book on EI brought the concept into the public domain. He studied 188 companies and looked at their competency models at leadership level. And he concluded that EI was more important than cognitive and technical competency combined. At the highest levels of leadership, 90% of the difference between success and failure was attributable to EI. Since then, there's been a lot of debate about EI, but the overwhelming evidence shows that it isn't a mushy, fluffy, nice to have. It's the critical factor that sets star performers apart. You can be a star performer without EI, but the chances are pretty slim. So why is this especially important now? The answer is that leaders with high EI have a measurable positive impact on the people they lead. A recent review by Chernis and Roche of 12 different studies involving over 2,700 participants found that when leaders are more emotionally intelligent, their subordinates are more effective, more satisfied with their jobs, less likely to quit, and more. A 20% difference in bottom line results is not uncommon between teams led by emotionally intelligent people and emotionally unintelligent ones. So let's have a look at the EI framework. As you can see, emotional intelligence is a framework of competencies with 4 domains: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and social skills. And the self column on the left is about you being aware of your emotions and how you manage your behavior and tendencies. The others column is about you understanding other people's moods, behavior, and motives and responding to them effectively. Now, the good news is that unlike IQ, which is pretty much static throughout a lifetime, EI competencies can be learned and developed. And that's been very helpful to me. I used to think that if my technical knowledge and skills were good enough, I'd be able to achieve anything I want. That was until I was passed over for a management promotion. At the time, I thought I knew it all. And in my defense, I was quite young. I certainly knew much more than the man who was promoted. Clearly, my boss was completely wrong and quite stupid not to have chosen me. And then I had a eureka moment when I realized that the people side of leading is the job. It's not just getting the task done. So we're going to have a look at the self column first, because if we understand ourselves, we're in a better position to support others. So starting with self-awareness, it has 3 competencies: emotional self-awareness, accurate self-assessment. And people with emotional self-awareness know which emotions they're feeling and why. They realize the links between their feelings and what they think, do, and say. They recognize how their feelings affect their performance. Accurate self-assessment identifies your strengths and limitations. And emotionally intelligent people are reflective. They learn from experience, and they're open to candid feedback and to different perspectives. And people with a sense of self-worth know their abilities and present themselves with confidence. They can voice views that are unpopular. They're decisive and able to make sound decisions despite uncertainties and pressure. And I'd like you to have which tools and methods do you use to increase your self-awareness? And please just shout out if you'd like to share. And Amanda, could you please, or could everyone just unmute themselves if you'd like to talk? Okay, so think about yourself now. Which tools and methods do you use to increase your self-awareness? For example,
well, I can share if you,
yeah, please.
Yeah, hello. Sorry, my connection is pretty unstable. So what I doing that I'm increase my self-awareness. I'm doing I meditate on daily basis, and I use one power technique that is quantum entrainment. Quantum entrainment is something like yeah, it's pure awareness, definitely, and I'm coming in state of pure awareness, and that helps me a lot because I used to be a person who is always active, who is always running around, and these techniques helps me to calm down my pretty wild nature and be more awareness, be more aware of the world around me.
Super, thank you very much. Has anyone else got a tool or a method?
Well, generally, I used to go through some structured questionnaires where I could understand where I was positioned, and then some other awareness tools like analyzing your life, what happened in your life, what were the elements that made you become the person that you are today, and then thinking about the areas where you are, let's say, strong, so to say, or some areas where you need to improve. And so creating a plan and trying to improve and then checking again. It's a continuous check.
It is. Thank you, Marina. We can never stop doing that, can we? That's true. Anyone else would like to share a tool? Okay, I think in business these days, there are several tools and methods that are available to us. Things like 360-degree feedback. I don't know if any of you can participate in that in the office. That one's particularly useful, I think. Profiling, performance reviews, things like the Johari window, which I'm sure a lot of you are aware of. And one that I sometimes try to use is an emotion log. So I, throughout the day or the week, I keep a regular check. I check in with myself to find out what am I feeling at that particular moment. So just keeping a track of my emotions and seeing if there is a trend, seeing if there is a particular trigger that sets off a certain emotion. So being self-aware helps us to recognize our emotional so that they. And emotional hijacks are those times when we jump to conclusions, explode, withdraw, or become aggressive, and then regret our reaction. And I just wonder, what emotional triggers are you aware that you have? I'll give you one example of mine, and then perhaps you'd like to share some of your triggers. So mine include people who say always, never, especially when my husband says, you always, you never. Rage is a mild response compared to how I react at those times. And another one that I was very conscious of when I worked in the Middle East was the N-word in the Middle East is a guaranteed emotional trigger. It might not be the N-word you're thinking of. The N-word there is no. So a no was guaranteed emotional trigger. So I wonder if any of you would like to share your emotional triggers.
I don't know if this counts as a trigger because it's a rather large one and will sound airy-fairy, but coming up to a full moon the week before, my emotions are sort of just completely haywire, and I then sort of look and see on the calendar for this. So it's not exactly a trigger, but it's a moment in time when they are high.
Absolutely, yeah. Super. I'm sure a lot of us with similar hormone levels have the same issue. Yeah. Thank you, Tanya. Anyone else?
Well, generally, well, there are different moments. A moment in which you can sort of prepare, you're self-aware, you are more aware when you know that what you're going to say or do is going to have an impact on people. And so I try to look at myself from the three different positions. So looking at me, being in a position of someone else, you know, looking at you and looking at the relationship which is going on. It is hard, but if you really practice that, it's important. So this is what I try to do. Of course, it doesn't work always, especially when you are involved emotionally in your family rather than in a working environment. It's much easier to check and control your emotions when you work rather than when you are in an environment when feelings are even more important.
Yeah, and I guess part of that could be because we feel more invested in our families than perhaps, you know, with our work. That's true, absolutely. So triggers are the things that we need to look out for, and especially at the moment. So I'd like to ask you the question: why is it important now to relook at our self-awareness, and especially those triggers?
Well, I think the world is changing, right? So the optimistic side says that, you know, we're moving to a better normal. Like once we get through this situation, people will have more opportunities, in fact, because it's broken open that paradigm of having to be in the office in a particular environment, etc. Now more people are willing to accept people working from home, which gives a geographical expansion. So there's a positive side to that. But you know, I worked from home for probably 20 years of my career, and you know,
we've lost you, Amanda. Can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. The internet's horrible. I'll turn my video off. Is that better?
I can still hear you.
Yeah, me too.
Okay. So I just turned the video off to make it better bandwidth. So one of the things that I think is a trigger is that whole idea of being on the mummy track. Right. If you work from home, you know, that was always one of my particular triggers, you know, to make sure that you were being valued on what you produced and what you did versus where you actually worked from. I think that's going to be a real important one in this new world order.
Definitely. And that might become the new norm. Absolutely. Yeah. For me, why it's important for us to relook at our own self-awareness now is because we are likely to be in a heightened state of emotion. And if we're not in a heightened state of emotion, the people working with us are likely to be. So triggers that we could normally take in our stride at the office or whatever might over, and we may become indecisive and unsure because of it. We might think that we should hold back on saying things that could be unpopular with the team, for example. So being aware of our own triggers is and emotional potential hijacks is pretty important, I think, at the moment. So let's have a look at the second EI domain, which is self-management. When you're fully self-aware and you know what your triggers are, and then you can manage your emotions, or begin to manage your emotions. When you can manage your own emotions, you'll be confident enough to deal with others. And on this one, self-control is the key. Leaders with this competence manage their impulsive feelings and emotions well. They stay composed, positive, and unflappable, even in difficult situations. They think clearly and stay focused under pressure. Their sense of self-worth means that they can be consistently transparent and honest. They can be honest about their values, their mistakes, and their faults. They're adaptable and comfortable with ambiguity. And they have high standards for themselves and for the people that they lead. They seize or create opportunities and are self-motivated. And they can roll with the punches. They have a glass full outlook on life. Does this mean that they don't sometimes feel angry or hurt, pessimistic? No, none of us are perfect, but it does mean that they can recognize those feelings and nip them in the bud before they say or do something. And that is bound to have a positive impact on your team climate. Would anyone like to share their top self-control tips? So we've talked about triggers that might set us off. What do we do now to when we are perhaps triggered into an emotional state? What do we do to control ourselves from overreacting and then regretting our reaction?
I'd like to just say something. I think removing yourself from the situation, like going for a walk or just doing something totally different, just to kind of block it out until while you think it through or breathe it through. So I think that always helps, a good stiff walk.
Definitely. Yes. Removing yourself from where the trigger is and allowing your emotions to calm down a little and your thinking brain to re-engage. Super. Thank you.
I'd like to share what I do when I get triggered is I try to not think about the topic for at least 24, 48 hours. Really let myself cool down and then only touch it once I've cooled down and I'm reasoning with a clear mind. Yeah. So really this myself, but more than just a few hours, literally a couple of days.
Yeah, great idea. And I absolutely agree. It's really important to do that, especially if you're going to put something in writing.
Exactly.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to share?
Well, getting back to working situations, if I know that I'm going to be in a situation where some special chords will be touched, I prepare myself. So I prepare thinking about how people would react on what I say. How would I react if they say that? So I prepare a sort of plot, something that might happen in that particular meeting, and then try to understand what is the best way for me to react in order to achieve what I want without offending anybody, without getting loud or whatever. so that my objective can go in line with the objective of other people. So it's very important to understand that. And if you prepare yourself very well, then it works. Before giving advice to someone, also when I train, I like to test everything on myself. And so if it works for me, I think it works for everybody. So I think a preparation is very important. Then in more in situation where you are taken by surprise, then it might be different, but at least listen before talking, and let people talk, not interrupt, because when you interrupt, probably you do the wrong thing because you have not understood completely what people want to say. Just an example, of course.
Great, thank you, Marina. That's a very useful one. And I use similar kind of things to you. One thing I like to do is if I know I'm going into a contentious meeting, or a meeting that could be contentious, I write down my objective for the meeting and I keep it on a piece of paper in front of me. And when I feel myself responding emotionally to what's going on in the meeting, I really focus on my objective. And I think to myself, is it more important to prove this guy wrong, or is it more important to win the contract? So yeah, great tips. Thank you very much for sharing, everyone. If you asked about your self-management competencies, as you can see on the slide here, what would they tell you to stop or start now in terms of your self-management? So especially during this period where the world is upside down, what do you think your teams would tell you? Please stop or start doing X. Okay. We can if no one's got anything they'd like to add, that's absolutely fine. But it's a question that you might want to take back to the office with you when you do go back. So there's one final point on self-control that I'd like to bring up, and that is that the emotionally intelligent leader owns his or her feelings. And you'll hear people say things like, "He makes me so angry," or "She really irritates me." But actually, when you think about it, that is impossible. No one can physically get into your head and make you feel things. So except in very rare situations, it's the voice in our own heads that makes us think in a certain way and therefore to feel a certain way. So instead of saying to herself, "He makes me angry," the emotionally intelligent leader says, "I feel angry when he blah, blah, blah." Okay, so owning your emotions is a great tip in terms of managing your emotions yourself. Okay, let's have a look at the next EI domain, which is social awareness.
Sorry, I would have a question regarding
social awareness is understanding where the other person is coming.
Jackie, sorry, there's just a question come through actually.
Yeah.
I would like to ask, as a woman, and as women are stereotypically seen as emotional, how can we change this sentence of "I feel" to something that is more into our advantage?
I think I've understood the question. So it's okay to say, "I feel angry when this happens." That's being transparent about your feelings. If you want to sound a little bit more assertive, you could say something along the lines of, I need you to, or "I would prefer it if you." Well, If you've still got a question on that, maybe we can come back to it. I just can't hear if you're still there. So,
Yeah.
shall I move
sorry.
on? Social awareness is understanding where the other person is coming from. And you need three things to be socially aware: empathy, organizational awareness, and a service orientation. So empathy is the ability to sense others' feelings and perspectives. It's taking an active interest in their concerns and picking up cues about what others feel and think. For a leader, it doesn't mean adopting other people's emotions as your own or trying to please everybody. Empathy means thoughtfully considering employees' feelings along with other factors in the process of making intelligent decisions. So you're not going to make decisions based on other people's emotions, but you will take them into account. And then the second competency in social awareness is organizational awareness. And that is the ability to read a group's emotional currents and power relationships. It's the ability to identify influencers, networks, and organizational dynamics. And leaders high in the service competence build an emotional climate that enables the people directly in touch with clients to keep the client relationship on the right track. So could you have a think, and how would your team, and why does it matter? So if your team were to give you a score on your empathy, your organizational awareness, and your service orientation, how would they score you, do you think?
I'll have to ask the PWN team.
Sorry. Say that again, Vanessa. Sorry, I couldn't hear it.
I said I'll have to ask the PWN team.
Okay. Don't worry too much if you don't want to say the answers out loud. I suppose the main thing is that you ask these questions in your head and answer them yourselves, because the more you know about yourself, then the greater the chances are that you'll be able to put these EI tips into action when you get back to the office. So let's have a look at the last of the 4 EI domains, and that's so social skills are about using our understanding of other people's emotions to choose what we say and do in order to positively direct their behavior. As leaders, we have to get the job done. Achieving organizational goals is made a whole lot easier if we know that our people can do the job and will do the job. And we can use the EI social skills on this slide to make sure that they're as willing as possible. So you might want to use this list to ask yourself a few questions. Questions like, how am I inspiring others to bring out their best? Would a different leadership model to the one I usually use be more useful at this time? For example, should I be adopting a more commanding style or an authoritative one? Another question you might ask about, have you got a temporary team vision to get you through this period? The next question you might ask yourself is, how well am I doing in influencing others to support organizational goals rather than personal goals? And this applies to us as team leaders just as much as it does to our team members. And have I got, as team leader, have I got buy-in from other influencers in the team? As a leader, I know that I'm an influencer, but there will be others in the team. Am I on board with them and using them to help me to create the right climate in the team? The next question you might ask yourself is, Am I concentrating on developing others? Does Joe, what would it mean to him and his motivation at this time to develop a skill he'll need wherever he works? Thinking about change and being a change catalyst and champion. Am I being passive and pessimistic because of the situation about change, or am I leading it, actively leading it? Have I asked what's stopping us from changing the way things currently are? Am I managing conflict or letting it fester? Am I bringing disagreements into the open? Am I listening to different perspectives? Am I solutions focused rather? And a question around working with your teams. Am I really working with my team, or have I withdrawn in some way? Or is the perception that I've withdrawn? Am I maintaining team values and standards, or letting them slide because people are upset at the moment? Who have I praised recently and why? And what kind of role model am I being at the moment? So have a think now about your team. And if you're not a part of a regular team, think about the people you work with or for, your clients perhaps. And think now in terms of these social skills and the questions that we've gone through, where are there opportunities for quick fixes? So when you finish this webinar, what could you put in place straight away that would have a positive impact on the people you work with? Feel free to unmute and shout out.
Well, first of all, I think you have to know your team. You might work with different teams, and of course, each team has different characteristics. So you should always be yourself, because you are who you are, but you can change and adapt your behaviors. But first of all, you have to put down very clearly what are your values. What is your vision? Share the vision with the team, and then motivating the team, trying to understand how to motivate the different elements of the team without neglecting everybody. And then if you should understand if someone needs some development, maybe some people are not active or they are against your decisions because they don't feel they have the right skills. And so you should understand how to reinforce it. And with the vision, you can really talk to people, tell stories, how we will be in future, what will be your roles in working together, especially in time where your hope is very low, like today. I mean, we don't see any positive thing just around the corner. So try to create a vision where you can really talk about, you know, with optimism and say, okay, each of us can give an input in order to change something. And change should be perceived not as a threat, but something that can facilitate what you wanted to achieve. Of course, managing conflict is very, very important. And that's more or less, you know, what you can do with the team. But first of all, to know the team, especially if you work with different teams. The first approach is very important, and if they understand that you have clear in mind what you want to achieve and what will be the role of people, then the team can work well. It is very difficult anyway, because we talk about teams, we have the rules, we do this, we do that, but then the reality is totally different sometimes. But of course, if we have these tools, things can go much, much better.
Super, thank you very much, Marina. That's excellent advice. And I don't know if anyone else would like to add one thing, one quick fix that you might take away from this and put in place straight away.
Yeah, I do, if you can see my hand. I think that this is a time, because so much of the world is going through the second wave and third wave, there's a lot of fear. It's making people feel safe. The whole essence of empathy can, in some ways, be about listening. So it's about letting people share, whether it be personal things about their family, how they would like to work, asking questions that really hone in on what their personal preferences are at this time is one of the things we probably wouldn't have done without the virus as much, but this is a period for listening.
Super. Thank you, Cynthia. Sound advice. Would anyone else like to? Right. Basically, just to sum up this social skills, perhaps if you're not doing these things already, use this list to help you ask yourself the right questions, and then you could use it to put in place quick fixes. So this brings us to my final slide, which has 5 EI things you can do specifically during this crisis. And according to the mental health care provider in the US, a care provider called Ginger, 70% of employees indicated that the COVID-19 pandemic is the most stressful time of their entire professional career. So this level of volatility creates a new psychological dynamic, and this dynamic needs a new approach. So these are 5 things that you might not ordinarily do, but they might be particularly helpful to you during this time. So 5 suggestions to keep your teams on track and on board. And the first one is to reframe the situation. So think about where we are now in a different way so that you change the emotions you're feeling and how you manage them. If you expect the world to be complicated and messy, you won't be surprised when things don't go well. This doesn't mean giving in or giving up during difficult times, quite the opposite. By accepting that the world is inherently messy, you'll tend to be less perfectionist, and that will keep you from getting discouraged and losing sight of the big picture. So the second tip that you might like to use is communicate and what you know and commit. And for me, transparency is so important. I'm not sure if you feel the same, but in my experience, if you allow space for assumptions to be made, people will often make incorrect, anxiety-provoking ones. And it's our nature as humans to fill in gaps with negatives. So address rumors head on. Acknowledge what isn't within your control. Admit your feelings to the team, but frame them in a positive way. And the third suggestion is to modify the situation. So take control of shaping physical and psychological boundaries. For example, avoid scheduling too many long Zoom calls with a team that has young families. Check in with employees individually who don't seem as engaged in meetings or in their work. And probably the most important thing in this point is manage your own boundary between work and home, because if you take care of yourself, you'll be better able to take care of your teams and organizations. And then number 4, enlist the help of others. Even the most emotionally intelligent leaders reach out to others to help them better understand and manage emotions. And help could be found inside or outside your organization, but look particularly for help in building a sense of trust and safety within your team. And the 5th tip is to create an EI-friendly culture. So a 2019 showed that 65% of C-suite leaders rated self-awareness, empathy, and intuition as their weakest skills. Perhaps now is the time to include EI competencies in your leadership development programs and to make them part of your performance management system. At a personal level, act as an EI role model yourself. For example, you might want to set up a virtual team meeting every Friday morning. Praise positive accomplishments of individuals and groups during the past week. Encourage employees with questions or concerns to email you right now. And then clear the rest of your Friday morning schedule and answer those emails straight away. So those are 5 tips, and that's our time up almost. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask?
Just as a reminder, don't hesitate to put them in the chat if you'd prefer that. If you're having bandwidth problems, for example, and we can read them out. Otherwise, we'll put the spotlight and ask the question directly.
Can I ask a question, Jackie?
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay? So what would be your top tip for encouraging other people to have more emotional intelligence when you feel they haven't?
Good question, Crumbs. How long have we got? Yes, well, I suppose we can use those occasions to, for example, you know, someone might be getting emotional and they start coming out with "you always," or they say things like "you should let me blah blah blah." You know, it's those must and should type words that probably give us a good indication that they're becoming emotional. And I think there are several techniques that you can use, and a very simple one is just repeating the word that they've used. So for example, if someone says "you never listen to me," simply repeating the word "never" might give them enough time to pause and rethink, where am I going with this?
Like a fogging technique.
Sorry, say that again, Vanessa. Sorry.
Fogging technique, I think we call them sometimes.
Oh, do tell us. Yeah.
Well, a fogging, have you heard of that? Or no?
No, do tell us.
Well, fogging is more when you kind of repeat or agree to calm somebody down who's very irate, because obviously it's not going to go anywhere if you agree with them, or you know, or actually just like you say, repeat. I think call centers use it quite a lot.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so I think
okay,
it's
super.
kind of a call center training technique when they sort of stick to the same paraphrase. Yeah, so fogging.
Okay, thank you. Very useful tip. Super.
Yeah, you know, there's something else.
Has always worked for me, and that is, especially if somebody's extremely heated, you can use this with, you know, teenage kids or clients or whomever, is just to simply say, "Thank you for sharing." And it just stops them in their tracks. They don't seem to have comebacks. So right, it's an interesting way to neutralize someone.
Great idea. Any other questions?
This is more a comment than a question, but you asked at the start of the call if there were any tools that people used, and one that I wanted to bring to people's attention, it's one I learned about just recently. It's a marketing tool, but it's actually quite good for this type of stuff. It's called Crystalnose. And it's a website and also an extension to LinkedIn. So what it does is you can actually go in there, you can take the tests, and it will figure out what your personality is like. So for example, it does a DISC type of analysis, but some other things as well. And then when you put it as an extension to LinkedIn, if you're looking at someone else's profile, it will actually do an analysis of their profile as well and give you the best way to approach that person.
Fantastic. Gosh, thank you for sharing that. That is very useful. What was it called again?
It's called Crystalnose. It's actually a growth hacking tool, but it's when you were speaking, I thought, you know, it would also be a good application for this, because you get 10 free profile analysis in it, but you can do your own profile analysis for absolutely free. So you know, it's really quite interesting. And what it does is it analyzes your social posts and things you've liked, etc., to come up with a profile of you as well as the input you give. And I thought it was very equally accurate.
And there was a message actually just from Lexia. Did that answer your question, Lexia? You asked us to repeat what it was called. So
I'll put it in the chat. It's called Crystalnose.
Let's put it in the chat.
Okay, well, if there are no other questions, that brings us to the end of this webinar. And if you would like me to send you a short EI self-assessment tool, please just email me at jackieschwarz1@gmail.com, and I'll email it over to you. So I'd just like to say thank you very much for being with me during this time, and I hope that it's been useful, and thank you very much for participating. Amanda, over to you.
Thank you. I'll put my video back on, and hopefully I won't go back into internet oblivion. So yes, thank you everybody for attending, and thank you to Jackie. It was really a very nice workshop, and we appreciated the time that she took to do it. As a follow-on, as I said, for the next webinar, we're going to be doing the habits of the optimist, which for some of you who already attended our optimism cafes in our last confinement, it's part of the same group who's doing that.